Jack Harrington is an excellent teacher, and he's about to teach you how to develop web apps with micro-frontends.
I'm Jack Harrington. I was a principal engineer at Nike and also at Walmart Labs, and I'm here to talk to you about what micro-frontends are and get you up to speed on that. So why do you want to do that? Well, lots of Fortune 500 companies are very interested in the topic of micro-frontends, and there's a good reason for that. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through micro-frontends all the way from tip to tail. But as anybody who has watched my channel before, which is linked to in the description, they'll know that I like to entertain as much as I like to educate. So I'm going to do a good action movie trope and jump you right into the heart of the action before backtracking and laying the foundation. So let me get you excited about micro-frontends first, and then I'll talk to you about what comes next. So don't worry in this first section if you get confused. It'll all be clear by the end. So let's jump right into VS Code right now. I'm over in VS Code, and I'm going to bring up the terminal. Actually, I'm going to bring up two terminals, and we're going to go build two apps. So in this first terminal, I'm going to run pmpx and then create mf app. So pmpx is like mpx. If you have mpx, just use that. And create mf app is for create module federation app. So in this case, I'm going to pick the name of my host, and I'm going to call this one home because this is going to be the homepage app. I'm going to choose this an application on port 3000. I'm going to use React and JavaScript and also Tailwind. Now in this other terminal, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to do pmpx again and create mf app. And in this case, I'm going to call the application PDP, or in e-commerce world, product detail page. We're going to application, and this one's going to go on 3001 because you can't have it on the same port. Again, it's going to be React, JavaScript, and Tailwind. And again, I'm going to go into that directory and do exactly the same thing. I'm going to yarn, and if that's successful, then yarn start. Okay, my home page is running. Let's go back over to my browser, and it shows me that I now have an app. It's called Home. The framework is React, language is JavaScript, and it's Tailwind for the CSS. And there's exactly the same thing on port 3001, except that it's PDP. So let's say that we are the homepage team. These are managed by two different teams. And we are going to take on the task of building the header. So I'm going to create a file here called header.jsx. I'm going to import React from React. And I'm going to export a default function called header. And it's going to return some HTML out of there. And it's going to have a div that's got some Tailwind on it. Let's see, it's got some padding, it's got a background that's blue, some text that's white and large, and it's in bold font. And I'm going to call this fidget spinner world because our app is going to be selling fidget spinners. All right, so let's go back over here and create a new file called footer.jsx and do pretty much exactly the same thing. And we're going to put into here only the best spinners because that's our motto. We only sell the best spinners, and we'll say that that's the footer. And now let's go over to our app, and let's bring these components in just as you would any normal React components. So header, we're going to bring in from that header file. And footer, we're going to bring in from the footer file. And I'm just going to drop these down here. Header, and then footer. And in here, I'm just going to say that we have the homepage content. So we'll start off with a class name where you give it a little margin vertically. And we'll say that this is the home page content. And wrap that div up, and let's take a look. Yeah, okay, looks good. I'm going to remove the little top margin there, and mwah, beautiful page. Okay, so now the PDP team is like, okay, we're going to start implementing, but we really don't want to actually redo the header. We want to use your header. So can we do that quickly? Well, absolutely we can, because we can turn our header on this homepage and the footer into micro-frontends, and we can share them with the PDP page really simply. So let's give that a try. So I'm going to go into a file here, webpack config. So this is the webpack configuration. I'm going to scroll down here to the module federation plugin, and I'm going to say that this application, which is named home, exposes the header and the footer. So we're going to give it the name header. And this is an object where you give it the key, which is the expose name, and then the location of the module, or the file in this case, that you want to expose. So then in this case, we're doing the header, and then we're doing the footer. And it's a good idea to keep the names obviously the same between those two. Don't want to confuse anybody. Great, so the only thing we need to do now is just restart home. So now I'm on the home terminal and I'm going to restart that. So I'm going to say yarn start again because we need to reload that Webpack configuration. But once we run it, we can see that it works just fine. But there is something new that's been added, and that is a remote entry file. So in localhost 3000, there's also remote entry.js, and that is a manifest of all of the modules that are exposed by the homepage application. So I'm going to copy that link, and then I'm going to go over to our PDP application, into the Webpack config, and scroll down here, and I'm going to say that we have a remote, and that remote is home, and its URL is, well, home at, and then I give it that remote entry URL. Now, why home? Well, that's the same home as defined in this Webpack config as the name right here. And the only requirements on this is it has to be a valid JavaScript variable name. So you can't use things like dashes. So it can't be home page. It could be home underscore page. That's fine because it's a valid JavaScript variable. So we're going to use home. And now this is going to allow us to access any of the exposed components from home. But of course, we have to restart the server again. So let's go over here to PDP, and then we'll restart the server just to get that Webpack configuration loaded. And now if I go over here to our homepage and grab app like that and copy out this because I'm kind of lazy and I don't want to retype all that stuff. I'm going to go over here to our PDP and go to the app, which looks almost identical because it came out of the same template. I'm going to paste that in there, and I'm going to say PDP page content, and I'm going to hit save. Will that work? Let's try it out. Okay, so I can't resolve the header and the footer, obviously. Okay, so there's no local header and footer, but if I do home here, and I save, and I go back into here, we can see now we're serving the PDP page content, and we have our header and our footer. The exact same header and footer that came out of the homepage. Awesome. And even better, check this out. So I go to header here and I say fidget spinner world 2, the fidget spinner world thing, and I do refresh here. Awesome. I get that as I would expect. And I go over to PDP, and without any restart or refresh or code change or anything like that, other than hitting refresh in the browser, I get the updated content. So that's a runtime connection between these two applications. Okay, so let's have a look at our completed application that you will have by the end of this video. And of course, all of the code is available to you on GitHub. And let's talk about why micro-FEs are so important and why companies are really invested in them. So first off, this is our application. You can see that this is the completed homepage. This is on port 3000, as we started before, and it's got all of our fidget spinners, and it's got our header, it's got a cart link on it, it's got a way to log in. There's a product detail page that shows the detail around one of our spinners, and there's a cart page that shows you all of the products that are in your cart. So the reason that big companies are interested in micro-frontends is the same reason that big companies are interested in microservices when it comes to the back end. So on the back end, you used to have monolithic API servers, and that meant that a bunch of teams were working on a single code base that had a single deploy cycle, and the microservice revolution allowed that to change. So now every team could manage its own server and update independently. Micro-frontends bring that same methodology to the front end, meaning that every one of these applications, homepage, PDP, and cart, are managed by separate teams. And now they can go and deploy independently. And then if they vend out any micro front ends that are consumed by other teams, those are automatically updated when they deploy. So for example, in this case, the cart team manages this little cart drop down over here. And whenever the cart application deploys, that cart gets updated along with it. And all of the other applications reuse that cart. And so it's done dynamically. So not only can the teams manage their own applications, but they can actually manage smaller pieces of the UI. So now the question becomes, when do you decide what is a micro-FE and what is not? Well, let's jump back over here to the atomic design methodology. So the atomic design methodology, pioneered by Brad Frost, basically defines how UIs are structured. So you start with atoms, which in this case would be things like a button or a label or something very small, like an image. And then there's molecules, which are slightly larger components that use a bunch of those atoms. For example, a labeled input, which may use a label as a text and then an input as well, and it manages the relationship between those, usually just statelessly. And then there's organisms. And in this case, an organism would be something like this cart drop down over here. So it's a self-contained piece of UI that manages its own state and understands how to bring together all of the molecules and atoms to get something done. So in this case, that would be these text fields are here, the clear cart and the checkout. And it's this unit of UI, the organism, that I think is most appropriate for sharing as a micro front end. I don't think that you should runtime share atoms and molecules. That's just my personal opinion, but that's where I kind of draw the line. And then there's also templates and pages. Those don't really categorize for me as micro-FEs, but they are things that you can share. In fact, when we talk about micro front ends more in this video and as we go along, we'll be talking about the underlying technology here, which is module federation. And module federation actually allows you to share a lot more than just micro front ends. In fact, we'll actually start off by sharing some functions, and then we'll get into components, and then we'll get into sharing full page contents and routing. So it's really exciting stuff. Okay, I've introduced you to the world of micro front ends and why they're important to companies. Let's now talk about module federation and what it is and why it's different from other techniques of sharing code. So module federation is a feature that's built into Webpack 5. It's absolutely free, and it is part of the standard Webpack 5 deployment now. So anything that's built on top of Webpack 5 can use module federation. And as you saw from that PNPX, I've actually got it set up so that you can use, 10 different view templates right now. And there's also Angular and other frameworks that can also use module federation. So module federation can be applied to pretty much every popular view framework. It's great stuff. So let's talk a little bit about why it's different from other methodologies of sharing. And to do that, I'm going to close out these and I'm going to get us into the kind of architectural box layer. And we're going to do that together. So we're going to do file here, and it's going to be called architecture.do. I have a Visual Studio extension, draw.io extension, that allows me to kind of draw diagrams and go all full architecture mode right inside my VS Code. And let me just drop in here what we started with, right? So we've got the homepage app that currently is at 1.0, and we've got the PDP app over here. And inside the home app, we had the header and the footer. So now let me go and build out the NPM version of this. I'm going to create a new page. We're going to call this NPM. I'm going to paste these two in. And then I'm going to bring in a box for the NPM library, right? So this is going to be our NPM library, and it's going to kind of sit somewhere between these two. And then we're going to take the header and the footer, and we're going to put it into our NPM library. And we're going to arrange it to bring it to the front so it all makes sense. Looking good. Okay, great. So now we have extracted our header and our footer into our NPM library, and now we got to reuse those. So I'm going to go and draw a link between the homepage app and the NPM library. And I'm going to do the same thing with the PDP app. All right, so drop that in there. Those are looking good. I want to move this around a little bit to get these arrows nicely lining up. Okay, cool. So let's say now that we are a developer on the homepage app. And as part of the homepage team, our job is also to maintain the header and the footer in this shared NPM library. And so I get a Jira ticket saying, hey, we need to go and change this text or whatever. Now I've got to go and jump from where I'm normally working, which is the homepage app, working on features in that app. And I got to jump over to this NPM library, which may have not been worked on in a long time because the header doesn't update all that often. And I've got to go and do that change, and then I'm going to bump that version to 1.0.1 and publish that out. to our local repository. And on the homepage app, I'm then going to bump that to 1.0.1, which is going to then grab the NPM library and release to production. It's kind of a hassle. Same sort of thing over here. I then have to go and talk to the PDP team and say, hey, there's a new version of the header, please use it. And then they would go and bump it, and there you go. But now from the customer perspective, right, I'm on the homepage and I click into a product. I'm actually now going to get an older version of the header on the PDP page app, which may actually not be great at all in a Black Friday situation at a major e-commerce company. They're going to want to be making changes all over the place all the time. And so when they make a change, the header, they're going to want to see that happen immediately between these two pages. So how are we going to solve that requirement? Well, let's go back over here and see what we can do and talk about some solutions that I've seen in the industry. And one of the most popular is to use something along the lines of an asset store. So we'll call this the asset store option. And again, we'll start off with our 1.0 and 1.0 as we have before. We'll kind of bring these down a little bit and widen out the space because we're going to need some space. And so now we're going to bring in this header footer project. And the idea of the header of the footer project is to contain that header and that footer. Again, we'll bring those to the front so we can see them. Again, oh my gosh, I got to make some more space here. All right, over here, boy, drawing diagrams. It's the bane of architecture. And what this one's going to do, this header footer project, is it's going to build some S3 artifacts. It's probably going to build a static version of the HTML, and it's going to build the JS, and then those are basically going to be injected onto the page. So we've now even removed React from the equation here, right? This is just maybe React that is rendered as static HTML and then some helper JavaScript to actually add some dynamic behavior. And that is then put up on S3. So we'll draw an arrow between those two things. This thing is going to create that S3 artifact. And in order to consume that, to make it easy on ourselves, we're going to go make a shim library. So we'll drop that in here. And its job is to go and fetch that content from S3. And its job is to return to the homepage app and the PDP page app some HTML or some references that it grabs from S3 that the homepage and PDP app then inject into their page templates to drop the header onto the page. So these guys need a connection to that shim library. And then the advantage with this one is that this header and footer can then update those S3 artifacts at any time. That shim library is designed to make sure that you always are getting the most recent copy, and that gives you your dynamic behavior. So this header footer project, when those late requests come in from product to update the header immediately, the header footer project can then deploy to S3, and all of those changes will show up on the homepage and PDP page automatically as long as they're not caching those results. You can see there's a lot going on here. And there's a lot of custom work. There's a lot of custom CI/CD. These are very custom pieces of work, very DIY, that are company specific. And of course, having any developers move from the homepage and start making changes on the header footer project because it's so alien and maybe entirely written in a different view framework, that's a big change. So there's a lot of context switching. So you end up having a team that's dedicated to that header footer project. It's really just a large company option. Okay, so what does module federation bring to the party? So module federation, let's go for the module federation approach here. And we'll start again with our homepage and PDP page app. And in this case, we have the home app and we have got the header and the footer. And all the PDP page app needs to do is just connect directly to the header and the footer. Just like that. And so you get the dynamic behavior whenever the homepage application pushes. So it goes up to a 1.01. The PDP page automatically gets the new code. You're not changing development environments. Those header and footer components are still written in React. And as long as the PDP page is also written in React, then they work right away. So there's no issue there with changing frameworks or different packaging or whatever. And also the work is done in context, meaning that as a homepage app developer, I just work on the header directly. and I just work on the footer directly. And there is some risk there, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but it's much lower in terms of context shift cost when it comes to development. So you can see why of these three methodologies, module federation is the most attractive when it comes to sharing component code. All right, let's put away our architecture tools for a bit and let's talk about some of the questions that I get most often when it comes to module federation. And the first one is around asynchronous stuff. So how do I actually include the header, for example, asynchronously? So let's do that. Let me just show as opposed to tell. So I'm going to bring in suspense from React. And here I'm going to say const header equals, and then do React lazy. And I'm going to give it a function that's going to import the header. And it's going to do a dynamic import. This is absolutely standard. This is an asynchronous dynamic import. It works in React, but it also works on any other technology you have, any type of library you have. The special sauce here is in this React lazy. And then we're going to wrap the header in a suspense. And we're going to give it a fallback saying that while we're waiting, we should put in a div which says, for example, loading. That's a classic fallback div. And so now let's restart our servers. So we're going to go back over here to our home and then start that. And then go to the PDP page and start that. As we go through this, by the way, keep a keen eye on this tab over here. It's really nice that it actually has the names of the directory in there. We're going to actually have 5 running applications by the end of this. So we're going to be doing a lot of jumping around here. All right, so here is our PDP page. And as we can see, Fidget Spinner World is running just fine. So that is asynchronously loaded. But if we kind of want to prove it to ourselves, let's go and make that stateful. So I'm going to go and return this here. And then do useState. And we're going to say, okay, so we have some state in here for showing the header. And we'll use state for that. And we'll only show the header if we are true. And then I'm going to go make a button. It says show the header. And I'm going to make it large. And give it some padding, just so we can see it. Okay, cool. All right, so the first thing we need to do is start that off as false. Right? We don't want to show the header by default. And then if we get a click here, we're going to turn that to true. So on click, set show header to just true, really. I'm not going to toggle it. There we go. All right, so we haven't shown the header so far. So let's go over here to our inspector and take a look at our network and see what we got going on. So I'm going to refresh this, and we're going to see that if I scroll down here, we have loaded the footer, but we have not yet loaded the header. And when I click on show the header over here, we get the header. And actually, let's go take a look at the size on that. It came in at 1.1 kilobytes. So that's another really important point to module federation. So if I look back over here at the Webpack config, we can see that there's another key down here that I haven't talked at all about, which is the shared key. And this is all of the libraries that are shared out of this homepage. So what it's doing here is it's grabbing all the dependencies by just looking at the package JSON and then getting the dependencies. So it's going to share them all out. And then it's also going to share, as part of that, React and React DOM, but it's going to override those to say that they're shared in singleton mode, which means that there can only be one React on the page at a time. And that's actually really important for React because React does have some data that's managed at the library level. And it is singleton in nature. And so if you have multiple instances of React on the same page, it kind of freaks out a little bit and breaks. So you don't want that. So Webpack shares and manages that sharing for you, which is really awesome. And that's why that header only comes in at 1.1 kilobytes. All it's doing is just bringing in just the component code for that header. Now, if there were any other dependencies that header needed, like moment or whatever, it would bring those in as well, but only in the case where you imported header. So that's really handy. Okay, so now I'm not going to do this way, so I'm going to go and kind of unroll all this. And we'll just go back to plain old header. And we'll talk about the next question that I get when it comes to module federation, which is what happens when the app goes down? And the reason that I get this question a lot is because this is the way that I demonstrate module federation. I run it in apps. But that's not the way that you deploy module federation. So let's go and do that. Let's actually take down home. And we'll go over here to PDP and we'll see, yeah, it blows up. Absolutely. 100%. No question. Yeah, blows up. Let's see. Script loading error. Couldn't load header footer. 100%. Absolutely. So true. If my demo app goes down, right, that's not going. So true. If my demo app goes down, then the sharing system goes down. That's true. But that is not actually the way that you're going to deploy module federation, and that's why this is not really an issue, but there is another related issue that we'll get into in a second. So the way that you deploy module federation is you build and deploy it to a static asset store like S3, because you want to get that Akamai or CDN style caching and all that kind of goodness. So let's first build it. And that's created a local directory called dist. So let's go in there and take a look at what that is. And it's got a bunch of JS files. So there's really nothing unique to this. You don't actually have a server in here. So I'm going to use npx and a module called server to run this application on port 3000, which imitates a static asset store, right? Server doesn't know anything other than just serve these static files. So it's just like S3 in that case. So now we got 3000 back and running. And I'm going to do refresh, and you're good to go. So as long as S3 and your static asset store don't go down, then you're not going to have an issue when it comes to the code not being there. So that's not the risk that you should be worried about. The risk that you should be worried about is that a developer on the homepage team may change the API contract of header and make it work in home, but not actually tell the PDP page team that the API contract is changing. That is the risk that you've got to worry about. So let's try that out and see how this actually can blow up. So first I need to get out of my sharing of the compiled dist there, and then go back and do yarn start. And then now we're sharing the live code again. So now we'll go into header, and I'm going to do app in here because the feature request was to put the app name into the header. So this is going to say app.name, and I'm going to save, and then I'm going to refresh the home page, and boom. What's the issue? Well, the issue is that we cannot read name because the app is undefined, right? There's no property. We didn't put a property called app on there. So as the developer on this Jira, I'm going to go and then say, okay, well, I need to fix that, right? So I'm going to say app name is home. Done. Okay. Jira closed, PR reviewed, done, deployed. Life is excellent. Next Jira, please. Right. So, okay. But over on the PDP team, we're just swimming along doing our stuff, and we refresh the page and blowing up. Right. So why is that? Well, we didn't make the corresponding change on our side. So yes, of course, I can make the change on the PDP page side and do all that choreography, but how do we actually protect ourselves from that so that this might potentially never happen? Well, the trick there is to use error boundaries or some equivalent in whatever view framework you're doing, but in React world, we're going to use an error boundary. So I'm going to create a new file called safe component. And we're going to bring in React. And unfortunately, an error boundary has to be a class. So we are going to extend safe component from a React component. Error boundaries are actually the one case that I know of where you absolutely have to use a class in React. Now we're going to have a constructor, and it's going to set the state so that there's a state value on this. And it's basically going to tell us whether an error has occurred. And then we're going to add the two methods that are specific to an error boundary. The first is component did catch, which gets thrown when the component catched. And then given the error, we return that our new state is has error true. Right? We can do a lot more here. We can specify what the type of error is. We can console log it. We can send it to, Splunk or whatever. You can do all that stuff. I'm not going to do that right here. I'm just going to go and render out something safe. So let's go make that render method. And basically I say, well, if we've had an error, then we're going to do something went wrong. Otherwise, we're just going to return the children. Okay, so now let's go back over to our PDP page and import our safe component from that safe component file. And then we're going to wrap our header in that safe component. And go over to here and we refresh, and yes, something went wrong. Great. So now our page still runs, but it doesn't render the header. Now there is a fallback methodology that I've talked about in a video on my channel where you can use both module federation and NPM so that in the case when something blows up, you actually fall back on an older version that you got in NPM. That's a great strategy too here. Really depends on how far you want to go with this protection. So let's go back over into our home page and actually fix the bug and see that it works. So we're going to remove the app here and then go and remove the necessity for the app over in header. Take down our 2 and there you go. Everything looks great. All right, so I've introduced you to the world of micro-frontends. We've gone and built 2 different applications already. We've talked about why micro-frontends are important, what module federation is, how to handle asynchronous loading, and how to handle error states. Let's now actually start building out our application and learn more about module federation as we do so. Now, to do that, we need to actually go and build our API server that's going to have our products and it's going to have our cart. Now, yes, I'm going to go and create a monolithic single server for this. I didn't want to have 6 tabs running, but yes, in the real world, you probably have multiple servers with multiple data. You'd have a product server, and you'd have a cart server and a user server and all of that stuff. But in this case, we're just going to have one server. All right, so let's go back over into our terminal and create yet another terminal. Yep, we're going to have 5 by the end of this. And again, I'm going to do PMPX. Now, why PMPX, by the way? It's a Windows thing, turns out. I'm on Mac, but it turns out that PMPX is the way to go on Windows. Who knew? And if you're on Windows and you're like, no, MPX works just fine, let me know. But I'm doing this for my friends in Windows world. So let's do create MF app. And in this case, I'm going to make it server. And instead of application, we're going to go down here to API server. I'm going to put it on port 8080, as I guess is usual when it comes to API servers. And what we're going to use as a template is Nest.js with auth. So this one is going to use Nest.js as our API server. It's going to be a REST server, and we're going to use JWT or JOT-based authorization. And that's the template for that one. So now I'm going to go into server, and I'm going to yarn it, get that all going. So let's take a look at what's in the server. Well, we've got a public directory that has all the assets that we want to put in there. And you're going to be able to find those on GitHub, but I'm just going to add them locally. So this is going to have fidget1.jpg, nice, cool, wagon wheel looking fidget spinner. A friend of mine's all into fidget spinners, so I figured this would be a fun demo data piece. And we'll delete that. And then if we go yarn start here, we can bring up localhost 8080 and then go to fidget1.jpg, and awesome. So now we know that we're getting this set of static assets. That's good. So now the next thing we need to do is ensure that we can get the list of products. So over here, we've got our auth stuff. We're not going to touch that. That is the JWT management. We're not going to touch users, but I will show you that there's 2 users that are kind of baked into this. There is Sally, who has a password of 123, Maria, who has a password of 123. You can add as many users as you like. Obviously, this is just demo stuff. You can hook this up to a real backend if you ever want to. So in modules, we've got 2 modules. we've got authorized and unauthorized. So let's take a look at our unauthorized controller. And what it's telling us is that we've got a controller that's camping on unauthorized. And if I get it, I'm going to return true, just a single return true value. So I'm going to do localhost 8080 and then do unauthorized, and it's going to return true. Fabulous. Okay, so what we want to do is change this code so that instead of being unauthorized, it's products. So first we're going to change anything that says unauthorized to products. And I'm going to make that lowercase. And this is going to break up all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to go over here to unauthorized, change all that, products. I'm going to change this directory name to products. I'm going to change these file names to products. And finally, I'm going to go into app module and change this to products. Do the lowercasing. All right, let's take a look. I'm going to do yarn start dev, I think. Yeah. So this is going to continuously watch the server for updates. I didn't start it in that the first time. All right, let's do this. Localhost 8080 products. Okay, cool. Returning true. That's great. Awesome. Okay. So now I've got my routing set up properly. I've got the products unauthorized route because we want to be able to get products without actually being logged in. In this system, we are going to have to be logged in to add items to our cart. We're not going to allow for anonymous carts. You can do that if you want, but beyond the scope of this. So the next thing we need to do is have our product list. So at a root level over here under source, I'm going to create a new file called products.ts. I'm going to paste in our product definitions. Again, all of this is available to you on GitHub. But let's talk about a little bit about what a product is. So it's got an ID, it's got a name, a price, a description, an image, which is the URL to the local host, and then the long description. By the way, I had some fun with GPT-3 to build out these long descriptions. So if there's some insane stuff in there, you can blame GPT-3 for that. All right, so let's go back over here to our products module and controller. And then over in here, we're going to import those products as well as the definition of a product. And it's not going to be from product data. It's going to be from products. Cool. And this is going to return an array of products, which is going to be from products. So let's save that out and refresh, and awesome. So fast. I love it. Nest.js is actually really cool. If you get into server work, I strongly recommend checking out Nest.js and of course GraphQL. All right, so let's go back over here to Visual Studio Code and then add another method. So this is going to be able to get by a particular ID. So in Nest.js world, you give it this decorator for the route that you want. So in this case, it's :ID, basically going to map that ID onto the parameter. It's going to be a string. We're then going to go in through the list of products and find that product ID. And we're going to parse out that string to a number. Okay. So let's go back over here and do, instead of products, we're going to do products 1, and that just pairs it down to the one product. Let's do product ID, I guess 10. There you go. Gold and silver gears at $9.99. Awesome. Excellent. So that's pretty much all we need to do for the server at this point. Let's jump back over into the client and get that going. All right, so let's close down that window, close down server, go over to home, and then in here, we're going to create a new file called products.js, and we're going to specify our API server is going to be at localhost 8000. And then we're just going to use fetch to go and get the list of products. So it's going to fetch off of 8080/products, and then it's just going to return a promise, which has the JSON out of it. So that's going to give us back our list of products. But while we're here, let's go and add another one for getting a particular product by ID. So get product by ID, and that's going to be used by the PDP page. So when they want to get data on their product, they just have a particular product in mind, right? They've got /product/1. They're going to go and give us the ID, and then we're going to get back the data that's specific to that by calling that by ID endpoint that we created. And then because I'm a big fan of reusing code, I'm also going to bring in a currency converter, which just uses Intel. And we're going to use the US dollars currency so that when we format the prices nicely, make it look great. All right, so let's go over to our app page. And we're going to do this a little bit differently. So I'm going to create a homepage content component, and I'm going to bring it into this homepage content area. And there's a good reason for that, but it's always good to not have mega components anyway. So I'm going to do a new file here and say home content.jsx. And I'm going to bring in the usual React and useState and useEffect. And then I'm also going to bring in products. By the way, if you're wondering how I'm getting that awesome hinting, that's actually GitHub Copilot. And then I'm going to start our home content component. It's going to have our product list in useState. And then to go get that, I'm going to use a useEffect. UseEffect takes a function, which is the effect that you want to affect. And then it takes a dependency array. So in this case, the dependency array is empty because we want to have this run only once. And then I'm going to get products. And once I get that value back, because that's a then, it's a promise, I'm going to set that products. All right, so let's start off on our JSX. So I'm going to put some JSX in there it's got some Y padding on it, and it's a grid layout. So it's going to have 4 across. So that's why grid calls 4 with a little gap in between each one. I love Tailwind, so expressive. And then with each of the products, I'm going to run a map and put the key on there for the product ID. And then let's try it out. So we're going to go over into our app, and we're going to bring in our home content from that home content file. And then I'm going to put it in there for the homepage content. And now I don't need that extra Y padding because I've already got that. So let's take a look. Let's hit refresh. Hey, cool. So that's making the connection to our API server and putting up our beautiful fidget spinners. I really should be getting into these. More than I look at them, I spent multiple days with this example, and I'm like, oh, wow, maybe I'll reward myself with a fidget spinner. All right, let's continue on. So let's go back over into our home content, and I'm going to paste in here that we want a flexbox, and that flexbox is going to have a name on it. So let's take a look. Oh, nice. Adding in our name looks good. And let's go add the price in there. I'm going to make that the next element in our flexbox. And it's going to use our currency formatter to format our product price into US dollars. So let's take a look. Pretty nice. Okay, cool. And I think the last thing we need to do is just add a description so the customer knows what they're buying. Let's drop that in there. Yeah, looks pretty good. Text is a little large, but that's okay. All right, so our teams are in the mode of sharing, and our PDP page wants to reuse our get product by ID function to get the product by ID. And that's one of the great things about Module Federation is that not only can you use it to share components, but you can use it to share any type of JavaScript. It could be constants, it could be encoded JSON, it could be functions, it can be components, it can be whatever kind of JavaScript you want. So in this case, we're also going to share out our products library, I guess, file, module from our home app. So let's go back over here to Webpack Config and scroll down again to exposes. And all we need to do is just add in products and then say that it's products.js. All right, let's save that out. And again, I have to reboot home because the Webpack configuration has changed. And now over on the PDP side, we can start doing the same thing. So I'm going to go and close out these files. And I'm going to go over here into the PDP content. And I'm going to create a new file. And we're going to call this PDP content.jsx. And into that, I'm going to also bring useState and useEffect because we're going to do pretty much exactly the same thing. We're going to hard code right now that our product is 1. And let's go over here to our app and bring in that PDP content from that PDP content file. And let's go and pop that down in there for its content. Let's take a look. There we go, product 1, as you'd expect. Okay, so let's start bringing in the code to get that product. We'll go back over here to our PDP content, and we'll bring in our get product by ID and also our currency formatter from home, but instead of header or footer, in this case, we're just going to use products like we did before. So let's save. And if this doesn't work, it's going to blow up right now. So nope, it looks like it's going to be good. Okay, great. All right, so let's change this to ID. And then I'm going to drop in here some state. So we're going to say that this is going to be the product that we've actually gotten. And put in here ID at the moment. And we're just going to say if we don't have a product, then we're going to return null. And so right now it's going to return nothing. And so we're empty in there. And so now we need to bring in a use effect. So we're going to bring in a use effect. We're going to say, okay, so if we have an ID, which is specified as 1, so we're going to have 1. Then we're going to go and get that product by that ID. And with that product, we're going to set that product. So in fact, let's simplify this code even a little bit more. We'll just say set product. All right, take a look. Oh, looks like we're good. Okay, so I think we probably got the data. In fact, we probably just do at this point product.name. Yeah, wheel spinner, good to go. So let's start laying out our nifty UI in here. We'll just replace all this. And we'll have a 2-column layout this time with a little gap in between. And then we'll have our product image in the left-hand side. So let's hit save, and there you go. Well, looking pretty good so far. Cool. So let's get to getting on that right-hand side, and we're going to bring in a div that's got a flex box, and it's going to have our product name that's expandable, thus the flex grow, and it's going to be nice and big. And then at the end of whatever that is, we're going to have the currency formatted for the currency price. That looks good, $5.99. Are you out of your mind? And let's bring in the description. Oh, pretty good. And then let's bring in the long description. Generated by GPT-3. All right, here we go. I'm not a good copywriter like that. Our wheel spinner is fun, functional. It actually looks really good. It's amazing how much GPT-3 was able to deduce just from like a wheel fidget spinner that spins wheels. Basically, I gave it that, and it gave me this, which is crazy. Okay, so next thing we want to do is allow for us to do like product 1 like that. Now, the Webpack configs are actually set up, if we go take a look at them, with history API fallback to true, which basically means that any route that isn't served from some sort of static asset is going to just render the same application in the dev server mode. So that's why you can basically give this any URL you want, any URL, and it's just going to go and give you the same page over and over and over again. So that's why we can use something like React Router DOM to actually select out different products. So what we want is we want to be able to say, 10, for example, here, and get 10 as opposed to our hard-coded 1, which is we have now. So let's go and stop our PDP server. And now we're going to go add React Router DOM. And I'm going to do a yarn start again. And then over in our app, I'm going to go and bring in our React Router DOM stuff. Let's get rid of suspense there. We no longer need that. We're no longer suspenseful. And we're going to wrap this whole thing in router. And I'm not going to do the save component stuff. It's fine. It's safe as is. I'm not planning on blowing anything up. And now inside here, you're going to put the switch. So this is where we're going to change out the content. And in React Router DOM world, you use a switch for that. And then inside of that, you've got a route. And we're going to say that the path is going to be something along the lines of /product, and then an ID. And then the component that is going to be rendered if we have that is the PDP content component. So let's hit save there and see if this works. Let's go. I'm going to close out that. We don't need that anymore. And yeah, it works fine. But if we go to, like, for example, just slash, right, that doesn't match this path pattern here. So you're not going to get anything. So let's go back to product 10, and that works fine because that matches /product/ID. So how do we go and get that ID? Well, let's go back over here to our PDP content, and I'm going to go bring in use params from React Router DOM. All right. And this is actually pretty easy. So I'm just going to put in their ID and then use params. Because use param, you could have multiple parameters. So this is going to return you an object, which we want to destructure and get out the ID. So there you go. Save that out. Oh, wow, that is pretty. That may be the one I get. So we've got our home page, we've got our product detail page. We're showing the customers a bunch of these fidget spinners, but now we want to be able to sell the customer some fidget spinners. We've got an e-commerce app after all, so we want to do some commerce. So that means that they need to have a way to log in and have a way to add and remove and view their cart. So why am I doing all this on e-commerce stuff and using this example? Well, this is going to allow us to explore how to share state between the host and the remote. So let's talk a little bit about the nomenclature there. So when it comes to our header, for example, the home page is the remote, and then the PDP page is the host. So the PDP page is hosting the header that is remote to it, and it's remoted in essentially from the home page. So when I talk about host and remote, that's that relationship. And in this case, we want to talk about exploring how to share state between the host page and the remote that's coming in. So we're going to have a way to log in to our server to get a JOT back. It's a JWT or JSON Web Token. Not sure why it's pronounced JOT as opposed to whatever. But that's going to be our authentication. And we're going to want to share that between the host page, which is going to want to know if it should add, like, for example, the add to cart buttons, and the cart MFE, which is going to show you your cart. So the MFE is going to want to know that you have a JOT, and the host page is going to want to know that you want to have a JOT. And you're also going to want to be able to share the cart items between the different parts of the system. So we're going to explore using this shared state. Okay, so let's jump in and start working on building out our cart. And that means going back to our server and working on that. So over on our server, we have modules, and we got this authorized module. And if we go down and we look at the README, we can see some documentation on how to use the authorization part of this. So for example, I'm going to create yet another terminal, and I'm going to follow this example here. The example is to do curl and hit up this localhost 8080 authorized route, which means that I need to have some authentication details to hit that route. I don't yet, so that's going to give me 401 message unauthorized. So what I can do is I can post to login with the username and password, and I'm going to get back a JOT. So I'm going to copy and paste this. Again, this is just in the README, and paste that in there. And that gives us back an access token, and that is our JOT. Now, how does that work? Well, Nest.js has a whole section in its documentation on how to do authorization, and you pretty much just follow that, and it'll give you this auth login, and then you can specify some users. Of course, you can go get them from anywhere, but again, I've gone and put in there Maria and 123, and that's what we're passing in here is Maria and 123, and that gives you back this JOT. All right, so then let's go back into our README again and see what I can do with that JOT. Well, I can scroll down, and I'm going to copy this line, which starts off with the same thing we did before with authorized, but now we're going to give it an additional header. And that header is going to say authorization, and it's going to give it a bearer. And then I'm going to just paste that. And I'm going to copy the JOT that we got back all the way up to, but not including, the quote. I'm going to paste that in there. I'm going to put in the quote there. And we're going to get back that our user ID is 2. And so why are we getting that back? Well, let's go take a look at our authorized route here. So we'll go into the controller, and we'll see that when we use a guard, and that's basically saying, okay, guard this method by applying that JOT or JWT and that particular auth guard. And that's going to give us a request when we get run and we pass that JOT. And from that JOT, we're going to get the user and the user ID. So that's pretty easy, right? Okay, so the first thing we need to do is kind of what we did with products, but now we need to do it with authorized. So we're going to need to change all that stuff that says authorized to cart. So cart here, cart there, cart here and everywhere. And we'll change the name to cart directory, and we'll change the file names to cart. We'll change this to cart. Okay, looking pretty good. A couple more carts in here. Seems to be okay at this level. Let's go back up to our app module. That's the last place that actually does it. See, I'm going to change authorized to cart, and then lowercase that cart, and hit save. And let's see, I can actually test this out by going up here and doing exactly the same thing as before, except instead of authorized, I'm going to do cart. And if I've made all the changes correctly, yes, that's good. Okay, so now we're working on the cart route. That's great. So we've changed the route successfully. And now we just need to kind of upgrade this cart controller with our cart functionality, because obviously returning a user ID is not what we want, right? We have the jot functionality. We can now log in. But we need to actually maintain a cart. So I'm going to start by bringing in the list of products as well as the interface for a cart. So a cart is going to have multiple cart items. It's going to have an array of cart items. And those cart items are going to extend to product. So they're going to be an exact replica of the product data, but with an additional quantity. Like how many of the fidget spinners do you want? Right? So the cart is basically going to have everything that you need to know to render out the contents of the cart. It's going to have all the product information plus the quantity that you want. And then I'm going to bring in a little helper function here called initial cart. And this is going to take a list of indices. So this is the references into the products that we want to kind of preload the cart for our particular users. So we're going to give Maria some stuff in her cart already and Sally some stuff in her cart already, just so it's a little bit easier to test. And we're going to store that down here in our cart controller as a private member variable. It's going to be called carts. And Sally is ID number 1, and she's going to have an initial cart that has items 0, 2, and 4 in it. And Maria is going to have items 1 and 3. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is return what's in the cart. So we're going to use this get method, and we're just going to return whatever's in the cart of that particular user ID. So again, Sally's number 1, so that's going to map to there, and Maria's number 2, and that's going to map to there. We're not going to return a number, we're going to return a cart. So we're going to return a promise to return a cart. So let's try this again. And there you go, cool. Okay, so now I've tried it again with the jot that we got back before, which has a long expiration on it. It's got a 24-hour expiration on it, so it's not going to go anywhere. And it's returning to us the contents of that person's cart. That's a pretty good start. We're doing great. So now the next thing we need to do is have a method where you can post to that endpoint and add an item to the cart, and then also a delete and delete an item from the cart. So let's go back in here. And so we're going to create a post method. And we need to bring in post from our Nest.js. And that's great. You're learning full stack at the same time that you're learning about all this micro-FE stuff. So there's so many good things to learn here about jot, authentication, and all the rest of it. Okay, so we have a now post method, same idea. So you just post to that same endpoint. Again, it's going to be auth guarded with the jot. We're going to get that request that's coming in before. But this time we're going to say that our body contains an ID, and that's going to be the ID of the product that we want to add, and then it's going to return the new cart, the updated cart. So first we need to get your cart, and we use the same thing we did here with this.carts and give it the user ID. And then we need to see if you already have an item in your cart, because we're just going to update the quantity if you have that item. Otherwise, we're going to add a new item to your cart. So if we have a cart item, we're just going to update the quantity. Otherwise, we are going to add on to your cart items by pushing the product and then a quantity of 1, right? Cool. And then we're just going to return that cart. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. And the next thing we need to allow is the removal of the cart. And for this, I have personally decided to use the delete method on that. Is that the right thing to do? I don't know. That's really up to you, but I'm going to just use delete for that. And again, it's going to be auth guarded, because we need, one, to know the user ID. And of course, we want everybody's cart to remain their own and secure. And all we're going to do is just basically, if you get a delete on that endpoint, we're going to look to get the user ID, and we're going to set the cart to an empty cart and return it. Just like that. Okay, we're pretty good. So I think our cart functionality is going great. So now the next thing we need to do is actually have a cart app, the third app here, to connect this to. So I'm going to go back over into our terminal. And you know what? I'm just going to reuse this terminal we've been playing around with to do another one of these PNPXs with that create MF app. And I'm going to call this one cart. And it's also going to be a React app. So I'm going to call this one cart. It's going to be an application that sits on port 3002. And it's going to be React, JavaScript, and Tailwind. And we can talk a little bit about why I'm not using Create React App or Next.js for this. Obviously, I'm using React, so why am I not using one of those? Well, Create React App and Next have very complex setups. Everything's in there with a really complex Webpack configuration and ESLint and testing and prettier and all the rest of it. And that's great. It's a great starting point, but it's a lot of extra clutter and bloat that distracts from what I want to do with Create MF App, which is give you a way to make proof of concept and test applications so that you can test out how Module Federation and Micro-FEs are going to work in your environment without actually going and making all the adjustments to those things yourself. So each one of the apps that it creates is the smallest possible thing that I can think of. It's basically just Webpack and X, Webpack and React, Webpack and Vue, Webpack and Lit, Webpack and all of the different, like there's 10 different templates that you can use. So, it's very, very simple and lightweight, and it's all there for you to try out and play with. Okay, so it looks like we've installed properly. So the next thing I'm going to add to our client is I'm going to add RxJS. Well, what is RxJS and why am I adding it? So RxJS is a set of reactive objects and functions. It's a very elaborate system for creating observable streams. So in our case, we're just going to use it really simply. We're going to create a behavior subject, which is a type of observable that's going to hold our JOT, our JWT, our JSON web token, and another one that's going to hold our cart. And the nice thing about it is you can always get the current value and you can subscribe to it so that when it changes, you get to see it. And the other nice thing about RxJS is it's not bound to any view framework. So we are going to use a different view framework here pretty soon coming up. And if I'd chosen something that was bound to React, then that would be a problem. Whereas in this case, anything that can run a subscribe method on an object is going to be able to listen to the JOT and be able to listen to the cart. And that means it could be anything. It could be vanilla.js, it could be solid, it could be Inferno, it could be all kinds of different things. So, okay, so it looks like we're good. We've added our RxJS. So now I'm going to start up our app. Okay, great. So just like we had before, very simple vanilla startup with the Tailwind stuff, and makes it easy to put some nice styling on it. Okay, so we're going to go over here to our cart, into a source, and I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be called cart.js. And this is going to manage in much the same way that products manage our connection to the products portion of the server. This is going to manage our connection to the cart and authentication side of the server. So we're going to bring in RxJS. We're going to give ourselves that constant API server. We're just going to point to the API server. And we're going to create that behavior subject for the JWT. So that's going to have, if I do JWT.value, it's going to tell me what the current value of that JOT is, which in this case is going to be null. And if I do subscribe on this, and I put in there token or something like that, and I say, console.log token, it's going to get called every time that a new value goes into JOT. And the way that a new value goes in there is you say JWT.next and you give it the new value, like that. So it's a pretty simple API surface here. You do next to publish a value, to give it a new value. You do subscribe to listen to changes, and then you can do value at any time to get the current value. So very, very simple way of sharing state. Now, on my channel, in my Module Federation playlist, there's coverage of Redux and a whole bunch of different state managers when it comes to doing this with Module Federation, but I want to keep it really simple, and this one, so it's RxJS. So what's the first thing we need to do? Well, we need to go and log in. So let's go and bring in our login. And our login is going to take a username and a password. It's going to do a fetch. It's a little bit more elaborate this time because it's going to post as opposed to get. It's got some headers, and it's going to need to send along the username and the password. And then it's going to get back the response. We're going to assume that it's okay. I'm not going to do any error routes on this, but of course you would need to. And then that JDBT.next is what I'm going to call when I get back the access token from the payload, because we saw when we did the curls ourselves that the access token is the key that we get back from the server that has that jot in it. Okay, so let's start building out our UI. We're going to actually go and log in at this point. So let's go and close this out, and I'm going to go over to our Webpack config. And of course, we need the header and the footer. And for this one, I'm just going to add all of these apps together. So I'm going to have a route for home. I'm going to have a route for PDP, and I'm going to have a route for myself, so I can be self-referential on cart. So if I internally use cart slash, it's just going to loop back onto myself, and Module Federation happily supports that. So the next thing we need to do is create a new file called cartcontent.jsx. And into that, I'm going to create a cart content. It's going to be a similar thing to what we had before. So it's going to have some state that's going to have that token on it. And we're going to do that login. But before we get there, let's go and make sure that that actually works. So I'm going to bring in the header and the footer from home. I'm going to bring in our cart content. And then I'm just going to replace our body content with pretty much the same thing as we've had in all of the other apps, which is the wrapper and then the header and the footer and then our cart content. All right, so let's take a look at what it looks like. And it looks like we're blowing up, and that's because we can't resolve home header. So what's the solution going to be there? The solution is going to be that we need to restart our Webpack, right? So we didn't restart Webpack, and that's why it can't resolve that. So let's go and do yarn start again. And I'll refresh. And we're good. And JWT is currently empty because we haven't actually tried to log in yet. So let's go and log in and see what we get. So let's go and bring in the login and the JWT from cart. And then down here in the use effect, I'm going to try to log in. But I'm also going to subscribe to that jot. And that, again, that's going to take that value, and it's going to set that token to that value, or if the value is undefined, to nothing. And the cool thing here about subscribe in RxJS is that it returns an unsubscribe. How cool is that? And it just so happens that the use effect is expecting that we return a cleanup function, and it just happily maps to the unsubscribe that we get back from the jot, like that. Cool. Okay, so let's try it out and see what we do. Hey, there you go. Okay, so we're successfully doing the login. Let's go and actually test that and see if it works over in our network panel. And we can look at our fetch, and we can see that we have a login, and we are sending the Sally123 payload, and we are getting back the response of the access token. Looks pretty good. And of course, we're seeing it over in the code over there. So thumbs up, good to go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to build out the UI that's going to go into the header over here. It's not going to go there yet. We're going to go and build those kind of locally within cart, and then we're going to share those out with the header, the homepage team that manages that header, and then they're going to consume those and put those in the header, and it's all going to turn into one nice, complete system. So to make it nice, I'm going to go and add some icons. So we need to go and add in remix icons. That's what I'm going to use for these applications, and I'm going to actually add it to all of them. So I'm going to stop this guy, and I'm going to yarn add remix icon to that one. And I'm going to grab that, and then I'm going to go over to homepage, and I'm going to do the same thing there. I'm going to go to PDP, and I'm going to do the same thing there. And the reason I'm doing it on this side is that CSS is not something you can share across Module Federation. It has to be either CSS and JS or JS. So that's not the case in either of these cases, I don't think. So so I need to add that dependency to all of these applications. So the next thing to do is restart everything. All right, looking pretty good. We got a home page, we got a cart page. That's good enough for now. And the next thing we need to do is just make sure that we have the icons in every place. So I'm going to go to the app.jsx file in all of our applications and add the CSS for the remix icons. So back over here in app, add it again. Add it again. Okay, cool. Now we have nice icons we can use in any application. So let's start building out our login UI. And one thing we're going to do is we're going to share a custom hook around use logged in. So we can build that now. So we got our cart file in cart.js, and I'm going to bring in React. And then down here, I'm going to define that we have a use logged in, and it's going to return that logged in state. And then it's going to set up a subscription using useEffect to that jot. So first it's going to set the value of logged in to whatever the current value is of that jot. And this little nice double exclamation point basically coerces it into a Boolean. And then I'll do the exact same thing I did with the subscribe over here. And there you go. Okay, so let's go back over to our cart content. And I'm actually going to remove this auto login because we don't want it to automatically log in, because the first thing we're going to build is our login screen. So I'm going to remove that. And then I'm going to go over here and create a new file. We're going to call this login.jsx. And we're going to bring in useState and that login and the use login from our cart. And then I'm going to create our login. And we're going to start off by getting the logged in state. And then we're going to manage some state around whether we want to show or hide this little pop-up that we're going to create. Then we're going to need some state to manage our username and login. So we create some state for that. So we've got username and set username, password and set password, as you generally do in these situations. And I'm going to say, if we're not logged in, then we're going to return null. So don't show anything. But if we are logged in, we are going to show a fragment. So we're going to start off with a little fingerprint icon. That's where you click on it to go and fire up your login. And that's just going to be a span that has within it a icon. So in this, you're using the italic tag to become an icon, as we always do. And I am going to add a ID here because we're going to do some test automation at the end of this, show you how to test this. Really cool stuff. And then if we click on that, we're going to go and set that show login so we can hide and show something. We're going to have like a drop down. And so the drop down is going to switch based on show login. And this is going to be basically kind of relative positioned. So, eventually we'll move it into the right spot, but this is for testing. We don't want it off the side of the screen. So I'm going to comment this out currently. And then we need an input for our username. So I'm going to pop that in there. That input is going to have a type of text and a placeholder of username. It's going to have a value of username. And then when it changes, it's going to set the username. This is absolutely regular React type stuff. And it's going to have some nice looking tailwind on it to make it look pretty. We can do the same thing for a password, but in this case, we're going to give it a type of password, the value of password, and also set password. And again, make it nice and pretty, tailwind style. And then finally, we're going to have a button that's going to be our login button. And I'm also going to put an ID on that so that we can automate it later. And it's just going to call login with the username and password, the same login that we got here from cart. So let's take a look and give this a try. So the next thing we need to do is import login into our cart content. And let's try that out. Login from login. And let's put it in there. So I'm going to put a div around the jot. Before that, I'm going to drop that login in there since I got it in the paste buffer. Cool. Let's take a look. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So I need to say if I'm logged in, then I return null. Here we go. Okay, cool. So, looking good. But of course, I don't know that it's there because I actually removed that use effect from before. So let's go and figure that out. So I'm going to go and rebuild that use effect that we had before to go and set the token. But I'm not going to auto log in. So now it's login. And yeah, cool. So we know we're good. We got the JWT, and that's great. Okay, so next thing we need to do is build out that little mini cart. So when I'm not showing the login, that means I am logged in and I want to show a little cart icon that shows me the number of items in the cart and brings up a little pop-up that gives you some details about what's in the cart and allows you to check out and clear the cart and all that kind of good stuff. But to build that, we need to add more stuff to our cart. We need to manage the cart much the same way actually we do the jot. So I'm going to go and create a new behavior subject for the cart. And then we're going to add some functions to get the cart and add an item to a cart and clear the cart. So let's start off with getting that cart. So we have a function here, get cart, and it does a fetch, just a super straight get from the cart, just the way we did before. And again, application JSON, but this time we're adding in that bearer. So that would be the bearer token with a jot value. And that's going to, first off, set the value of the cart by using cart.next. So it's, again, a behavior subject like we had with jot. And then it's going to return the contents of the cart as well. So if you want to get it that way, that's fine too. Kind of a nice dual purpose function there. Of course, now we want to go and enable this get cart down here. So once we've logged in, we want to automatically go and get your cart and make sure that that's up to date. But of course, we want to make some money. So let's figure out how to add an item to a cart. And that just takes an ID. And in this case, it's almost exactly the same thing. We're going to do a post in this case, because that was the route that we created on the server side, was a post. And then into that, we give it the ID, but it also takes the same bearer token as we had before. And that gives it its jot, and that gives your identity. So then we take the return value, which is just a response. We get the JSON out of it, and we're successful. So we want to go back and get a new cart. We could take the value that we got returned, and that would be the cart, but it's fine. We can just make 2 requests. And then finally, we need to do exactly the same thing one more time for clear cart. So again, same idea, but in this case, we're going to use a delete method as opposed to the post method. And again, we're just going to go and get the cart. So now we got a basic set of functions that allow us to manage a cart. Let's go put a UI on it by creating something called the mini cart. So we'll bring in our usual React use effect and use state, all the good hook stuff. And we're going to bring in our cart stuff. So in this case, that cart is going to be our subscribable value, as well as the clear cart function that we're going to need to use when we click on that clear the cart button, or really check out to, whatever. And then we're going to get currency, which is going to allow us to format currency, but we're going to get that from home. So we're going to use that module federation stuff to pull in currency dynamically from home. Okay, so let's start building out our mini cart. So we'll start off by having our list of items, and we'll get that from our cart. And we'll have a flag for showing and hiding that cart, because it's going to have that little icon there, and you click on the icon, see the cart, and click on the icon again. Goodbye, cart. And so we need to subscribe to that cart. So I'm going to use effect in here. Of course, you could go and wrap that in a custom hook if you wanted to, but this one is just going to do the same thing as we have before. So it's going to go and get the cart items and then subscribe. This little nice optional chaining here allows us to say, well, if the cart value is null, then don't dereference that to cart items. So it protects us from the value of cart being null in the beginning. Really nice. And of course, we don't have any cart, then we want to say nothing. So let's start returning out our JSX. And again, we're going to do a fragment, because we're going to have that icon, and then we're going to have the content. So we'll start off with our icon, and we'll have that onClick there, which is going to show and hide that cart state. It's going to have an ID on it, because again, we're going to do the automation stuff. It's going to have a shopping cart icon as opposed to the fingerprint. And it's going to have next to it the length of items in the cart. So that's just going to tell you how many items you've got in that cart. This actually sounds like a good spot to try it out. So I'm going to go over here to cart content. So I'm going to go and import mini cart from the mini cart file. And then I'm going to go and use that down here, mini cart. And let's see how we do. Okay, cool. So we're not logged in. It's not persisted like that. So I need to log in. And there we go. So Sally has 3 items in the cart. Awesome. And if we try again and we use Maria in here, Maria has 2 items in the cart. No, thank you, Chrome. I'm good. Okay, so it looks like our cart icon is doing well, and we got the cart count going. So thumbs up to that. So let's continue on and allow us to show and hide the detail of what's actually in the cart. So we'll go and create a show cart. And again, here we're going to have kind of a pop-up thing. This time it's going to be in a fragment. And we're going to have a 4-column layout, because we want the quantity, the image, the name, and the price. That's going to be the 4 columns. And then we're going to iterate through all those. So I'll use a map for that. So for the items, I'm going to take each item, create yet another fragment. And the reason for that is because of grid layout, you want these to be at the same level, all with each other. So that's why the React fragment in there. But we need the ID, so that's why it's React fragment and not the React fragment placeholder. And then the quantity, the image, the name, and the currency that's then formatted. So let's go take a look. All right. Again, we'll log in, Sally, cool, and there you go, nice. Okay, so Sally has a dragon wheel spinner, a wheel spinner, and a Jaman spinner. Very cool. All right, so of course she wants to know what the grand total is, how much money am I spending? So we're gonna add some more. We're gonna go and add 3 placeholder divs, and then essentially the grand total. And to get the grand total, we're gonna give it a reduce function, which is just gonna take the current reduce value, which is going to start at 0, and then add on every round the quantity times the price. So let's try that out and see how we do for the grand total. Yeah, looking good. Okay, apparently she owes us $20 for 3 spinners. Okay, cool. So now we need a clear button and a checkout button. So to wrap those, I'm going to create a flex box. And then within that, our first side of the flex box is going to have our grow div on it. And in there, we're going to have our clear cart. So, and again, we're going to have that on an ID so that we can automate that. And this is going to have some nice tailwind formatting here. I think we're just going to put a border on that one. Let's go take a look. Yeah, that's kind of nice. I like that. And we can actually clear the cart at that point. And now if I log in again, we can see Sally has nothing in the cart. So that's cool. That means that our server is persisting the state of the cart properly. Awesome. If we wanted to go and reset the cart, we just need to reboot that server because it's all in memory. Okay, so now we need to put at the end of this, we need to put our checkout button, which is basically going to do the same thing. You know, if you want to make a full e-commerce system out of this, then I guess you go to Shopify or whatever. Okay, so hit save there, and then let's try one more time, and it looks like we're good. You know, obviously don't have the cart there because I cleared it the first time, but I think we're okay. All right, so now the next thing we want to do is integrate this back into the header so that we get a coherent experience for the customer, and we get that shared experience on every single page. So really cool. So the next thing we need to do is go back over into our Webpack config. So let me close out a few of these files, and we'll zoom in on that Webpack config that's part of the cart, right? And so now the cart needs to expose a couple things. It needs to expose the cart functions that I had before so that I can subscribe to the jot and the cart. And it needs to expose the UI components that are the login and the mini cart. So cool, we're exposing kind of both functions and Micro-FE components here. So now we will reboot our cart server. And I'm going to copy these because I need really all of the applications now to be pointing at each other. So we'll go over to Home and change the Webpack config there so that now Home can look at itself, it can look at PDP, and it can look at cart. And PDP is also going to have the same things, so might as well just replace it all in one fail swoop. And let's see, so I'm going to reboot Home, and I'm going to reboot PDP. I made changes to both of those as well. Okay, cool. You know, the only hassle about all this is really the fact that the browser just keeps popping up every time. But otherwise, it's a really nice workflow. Okay, so let's go back up to Home, because now we want to bring in those Micro-FEs from the cart and embed that in the header. So let's bring in mini cart and login from cart. And let's make sure that it works by going over here to Home. And as long as things don't blow up, you're generally speaking okay. And now I'm going to wrap this one in a flex box. So I'm going to wrap the content here in a flex box. And well, the first item in that flex box is going to be our home title, or the title of our app. And then I'm going to have a flex end item, which is going to have our mini cart and our login in it. And I don't think it matters, the ordering there. I'm pretty sure it doesn't matter. So let's try it out. Hey, okay, cool. And now we'll log in, and looks great. How cool is that? That is so awesome. I love it. Okay, great. So let's change the CSS a little bit so that we can make it look pretty. So I'm going to go back over here to our cart and our login. Let's see, mini cart. And there was a little bit of justification that I got rid of there, the left, and the cart login. Yeah, that looked good. Bring in the left. You know, I like to make things look nice. So here we go. So, oops. I think I know the problem. Okay, so it's over there now. Let's go and go back over to our header and make sure this is relative. Oh, look at that. So nice. Okay, awesome. So now we need to be able to add items to the cart, right? Of course. So we're going to use that add to cart function over here in our homepage content to give us a way to add items to the cart, and that jot function and that use logged in to let us know if we want to show those add to cart ones, because we are logged in at this point. We should be able to add items to the cart. So let's go over back into our content for home content. So we're going to bring in some stuff from the cart. We're going to bring in add to cart and also that use logged in hook. And I'll use logged in, and we're going to use that to toggle whether we're going to show our add to cart buttons. Okay, so down here below description, we're going to check to see if we're logged in. And if we are, then we are going to align on the right-hand side with a little padding on the top, a nice little button. We're going to add some automation ID to that so that we can automate it later, where we can add to the cart. All right, let's refresh the page, and we're not logged in, so let's log in. And oh my gosh, okay, cool. I'm going to add to cart. Oh, yes. All right, here we go. And look at that. And so now check it out. We are sharing state. We're sharing the jot state. So the host page in this case, which has that home content, is looking at the jot and seeing whether it's logged in or not and showing these buttons. And then when it needs to add an item to the cart, it then calls the add to cart function, which then fires off to the server and then updates again that RxJS, which then updates that view. So in fact, here, check this out. This is even cooler. I can go over here to Rainbow Flames and it automatically updates. So the whole thing is reactive because you have that RxJS subscribe mechanism. So whatever state manager you choose, I strongly recommend that you make sure that it's reactive somehow. And that, all of them are really at some level, but things like MobX and Valshio, Jotai, these are all very reactive mechanisms. Of course, Redux is a bit more elaborate. I would recommend using Redux Toolkit if you're going to do that, but they all work, which is really the important part because context also works. I'm not going to do that here, but context does work in these systems. Okay, so of course our cart page is ugly, so we want to make sure that we have a complete cart page. So let's go back over into our cart and update our cart content. All right, so starting from the top here, I don't need any of that anymore. I'm going to bring in cart and clear cart from the cart. We're basically going to redo the mini cart, but just kind of writ large. And I'm going to create some state around the items and have a use effect where we subscribe to that value. And of course, I'm going to use that nice optional chaining on there to make sure that we have cart items. And if we don't, then we have an empty array, which allows us to safely render an array map. All right, then down in here, I'm going to start with a fragment. And into that, I'm going to use the top of the page to be a grid of all of the cart items. And it's going to be that 4-column grid layout. I'm not going to adjust the sizes like I did before. And then I'm going to go over to my mini cart, and I'm just going to grab pretty much all of this. Essentially exactly the same thing. And drop it in there. Cool. And let's take a look at our cart. So we haven't logged in. Let's go log in. And woohoo! And check it out. It's the same data. I added that Rainbow Flames before, and it's there. How cool is that? Okay. So looks like we need a little bit of get it all nice and aligned. Yeah. Okay, good. And then we need to add the buttons down here for clear cart and checkout. So let's go back over here and make sure that if we have some items, then we can show that UI. We're going to start off again with a flex box to allow us to put one button on one side and one button on the other side. And then, I'm just going to go and grab clear cart stuff because that's basically exactly the same code. So let's go over here and let's see. Is that the balance? That's the balance. Yep. Okay, cool. And pop that in there. And let's take a look. Okay. Refresh. Cool. Awesome. All right. And I can clear cart. Yep, I can. Hey, cool. All right, so let's go have a look at product. I'm going to go over here to localhost 3001 and then do product ID, 2, sure, whatever. Solid rainbow, I like that one. It's solid and rainbow. So what I want to do is I want to show you how to do micro-FEs across different view platforms. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to create an add to cart button. It's going to go in here. So we want to be able to add to cart from the product detail page. But for some reason or another, the folks on the add to cart button team have decided to use solidjs, which is a framework I love, by the way. So it's a cool choice to do the add to cart button and not React. So the question is, can we get these two view frameworks, React and solidjs, to talk together? And I'm guessing the fact that I'm talking to you right now is the answer is yes. So let's try this out. And this is going to give us our 5th application in our last tab. So let's go and create yet the last terminal. And here, got a cart. And I'm going to do, again, pnpx, create mf app. And this time, I'm going to call it add to cart. And I'm going to pick application, and let's see, 3003. And we're going to pick solidjs in this time, and JavaScript and Tailwind. Don't worry if you don't know solidjs, it's fine. So we'll go into add to cart. Very easy. And if you're familiar with React, actually solidjs is very close to React. And I think there's a lot of cool reasons to look into it on its own. So something you might want to look into on your own way. Okay, so here we go. So we're going to yarn, start that up. And there we go. So it's kind of similar layout as we had with the React stuff, except that the only difference here is that the framework in this case is solidjs and not React. And that's actually the way every single create MF app runs exactly the same way and gives you the exact same output, so that it's pretty easy to compare these different frameworks. So now, of course, this add to cart needs to be able to get access to that shared jot and the add to cart function. So we're going to go down here to the remotes, and we're going to give it the remote of cart. And I'm going to restart that server. And into this directory, I'm going to go create a new file called add to cart.jsx. And you define a component in Solid much the same way you do in React. So in this case, it's just a function, and it takes properties and returns some JSX. Now, there are no classes in this case. That's not something that solidjs supports, so it has to be a function. So in solidjs, there's a signal, which is the equivalent of a use state, although it can be global, it can be anywhere. It's actually really cool. And then there's an effect, same kind of idea, but it's like use effect. And then you have a declarative style when it comes to hiding and showing stuff. And the tag to hide and that tag to show is called show. So we're going to bring in those from solidjs. And then from module federation and the cart, we're going to bring in the jot, and we're going to bring in add to cart. Then we're going to create a signal for logged in. So it looks really similar, right? I mean, this you could imagine that to be use state, but it's called create signal in this case. The really cool thing about Solid is that this could actually be out here. It's really just a question of where you want to store your state, and it works the same way in both cases. So when it comes to state managers, solidjs, most of that's actually built into the core of solidjs, so you don't need a custom state manager. Really cool. So let's then do a create effect. And that's going to do that same jot subscribe thing. And when the subscribe fires, telling us that we're logged in, then we set that signal. And then for the JSX, we are going to return a show hide tag, essentially, that has within it a button. That button has the same kind of Tailwind stuff as we had on before. But in this case, when you click it, it's going to do add to cart. So there you go. That is the complete sum total of our solidjs component. Okay, so let's go over here to app.jsx and let's see how this is actually done. So the way that you render something in solidjs is you bring in render from solidjs web, and then you render the component. So in this case, that's that app that we had before. So if we wanted to bring in our component, then we would import that here. The only thing is we're not bringing in a header, so we're not going to be authenticated, so it's going to be difficult to test. So I'm not going to do that. But what we need to do is basically get this somehow so that it works in the React context. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to create a function and expose that. And that function is going to take 2 arguments. The first is the element that you want to attach it to. And then the second is the product ID, which is going to go into ID here. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to create a new file called place add to cart.js. And we're not going to bring in index.css. We're not going to bring in this, but we are going to export a default function called place add to cart. It's going to take an element, and it's going to take an ID. And it's going to render into that element. And what it's going to render is add to cart with that ID. Cool, right? Okay, so let's go and expose this. So we'll go back over to our Webpack config. And you know what? We'll just also expose add to cart. And also, of course, place add to cart, which is what we're really going to use. That's JS. Let's see, is that JS? Yep, it is. Cool. All right, so let's go here to add to cart and restart it because we need to update that exposes and get everything going. And I'll see that it's got a remote entry on there. And it does. It's going to tell us that we've exposed the add to cart and also the place add to cart. So let's go back over to our PDP app and import that. So we'll go close out these files and go to PDP, down to Webpack config, and we're going to bring in add to cart. And it's called add to cart, and it's on that remote entry on 3003. Cool. So now let's go back over to our PDP content page, and we're going to bring that in. We're going to bring in place add to cart from add to cart. And let's go make sure that I get the name right. Add to cart, Webpack config. There we go. Cool. And we'll just refresh to make sure everything's fine. But of course, we can't find add to cart. And why? Because we haven't restarted the server. So let's go again to PDP and restart. And we'll refresh. And it looks good. So fingers crossed, things look good. All signs point to things being good. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount this on a ref. So we need an element. So we need to create a ref by using useRef. And where are we going to put that? Well, we'll put that down here. Ref is add to cart. And let's make sure that that works. Yeah, seems to be going okay. Doesn't have any problems with that. So let's add a use effect where if we have a current on add to cart, meaning that the component is mounted, we have a unique element, then we're going to do place add to cart with that current element and then give it the ID. So let's hit save. Oh, okay. It looks like we have an error. So let's go and look at the console and see what that error is. Go over here to console, scroll up, and it looks like I messed up in my solidjs code. I just forgot to import add to cart in my solidjs. So let's go save that and go over here to add to cart, go into place add to cart. Oh, yep, absolutely. So let's go and import add to cart. Can't really use something until you've imported it, Jack. So let's say save there and run, and we haven't logged in. So we're probably okay so far. Cool. Can I do it? Yes, I can. That is so cool. How awesome is that? So now we've got a React app hosting a solidjs component because that's what we decided to use for that particular one. And let's see, do we make a good choice? Let's take a look and see over on our network. Take a look at the size of the payloads here. So wow, we're bringing in a lot, but let's see. Place add to cart was 2.7 kilobytes. So that's pretty nice. We're bringing in not a lot for bringing in that add to cart. And that's one of the really nice things about solidjs is it actually creates very, very small bundles. All right, so coming up next, we are going to take a look at how to do routing in Micro-Frontends and Module Federation. But before we do that, if you are a Git kind of person, source code control being and all that, I strongly recommend at this point to commit what we currently have because it's gonna get real here real fast. So we're gonna do some pretty cool stuff to address an issue that I want to talk about right now. So we've got our 3 apps. We got one on 3001, we got one on 3002, and one on 3001. So let's go put those kind of in the right order, I guess. 3000, 3001, 3002, right? So let's say I want to go and test out how my homepage connects to my cart as an example, right? So I'm logged in here and I'm adding stuff to my cart. If I go over to 3002 right now, and then I see that I'm not actually logged in anymore because I'm not actually storing the state and I'm getting a whole new page refresh. It's not actually a single page application. So is there a way we can actually turn these apps into a single coherent single page application? And this is a big deal because what happens is when you fracture one of these monolithic applications into a set of smaller applications, yes, they become a lot easier to deploy. But first, you run into the header footer problem that we had before. So you have to be able to share components, i.e. micro-FEs like the header and footer, between applications. But also, they become harder to test, right? If you want to do a coherent test where you start at the home page, you add something to the cart, you may navigate to another page, eventually you'll end up on the cart page and go through checkout, right? In order to get that done, you have to stage your whole system somewhere and then put in your code for, say, the cart as an example, but keep all of the code for the existing apps. And it just gets very hairy and hard to manage. Whereas if you had all of them as essentially single page applications where any of these applications could vend all of the pages for the other experiences, then, for example, if you were working on the cart and you want to make a change to the cart, but you wanted to run a smoke test that ran through the entire system, you could do that. Is it possible? Yes, it is. So let's go check it out. And that's why I'm saying we're going to make some pretty significant changes here, although we have started ourselves up nicely for this. So in each one of these applications, so cart, home, and PDP, we have implemented the interior of the app as content. So there's cart content, there's PDP content, and there's home content. And it might have seemed a little bit weird in the moment, but I had a plan, like the Cylons. So over here in Webpack Config, we're going to go and expose cart content in the cart app. So I'm going to put in here cart content. And then I'm going to get that from cart content.jsx. I'm going to save that out and we will go and restart cart. So we're exporting that. And that seems to be okay. So that's good. So now I'm going to do the same thing over in, let's see what is next, home. Okay, so we've got home content. So I'm going to go to Webpack Config there. And home is going to export the home content. So I'll just replace out cart with home, just like that. And again, save, and now go to home. And I'll stop it and start it. Now that looks good, great. And then finally, let's go over to PDP and go to its Webpack config. And again, we're going to expose out of PDP the PDP content. And we'll go down to PDP and restart that one. And that looks good. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over to the app for PDP, since it has React Router baked into it already. And I am going to copy some of this code. I might copy all of it, actually. And I'm going to take it over to home. And then I'm going to create a new file in here called main layout.jsx. Paste that in there. And we'll call this one main layout. And we'll get rid of the React render DOM. You don't need that anymore. But what I do need now in home is React router DOM. So we don't have that. So let's go over to home here and stop that server and then yarn add React router DOM. And then I'm going to start that server again. And now we start getting to the point where we need content, right? So we have PDP content from PDP. We've got home content from home. And we've got cart content from the cart. And now let's go take this main layout and I'm going to go over here to app. I'm going to bring that in as the one thing that we're going to bring in. And you know what? I'm just going to render it right here. We're not even going to have an app anymore. I'm going to save that out and we're going to see how we go. This is basically a test to see that all the connections are okay. Looks like we have an exported main layout. So let's go over and so let's just go make this an exported function. And then return this router. Okay, cool. And now at least we're getting a page, and that's good, but we don't have a home path. So we're going to add a route for the home. So that would just be slash. Now we're going to put in exact in there. So it needs to be that exact path. And that's going to be the home content. So let's save that out and refresh. And hey, that's pretty cool. And if I do slash product slash one, how cool is that? I'm actually getting the PDP out of the same app. This is 3000. This is the home app, but it's serving the content for PDP. That is really cool. Okay, so one more then. Let's go and bring in cart. So I'm going to do slash cart, and we're going to do cart content. Okay, cool. Now let me refresh, and now I'm going to do cart. There you go. Awesome. Very cool. So it's not quite a spa yet because we still need to do the linking component of it. So in order to get our spa nav going, we need to use link from React Router DOM. So let's go over to the header and add the appropriate links. So I'm going to paste in React Router DOM and I'm going to bring in link. And I'm going to put a link around fidget spinner world. And that's going to go to slash. And let's see, I'm going to add a little divider there. And then I'm going to go and make another link to cart. And we'll call that cart. Let's take a look. Cool. And so if I click on cart, so I click on this, I go to the home page. And if I click on this, I go to the cart. And even better, so if I log in here and I click on cart, the login is retained. It is a full spa now. How awesome is that? That is really cool. Okay, so another thing I want to do is just make sure that I have an ID here for the cart. And that's just to make sure that our automation works properly. But I'm going to go, because I'm a little bit of a stickler here, I'm just going to go and add a little bit of padding or margin on the X around that. So just make it nice and have that be a flex box. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, cool. So now if we want to click on one of these, right, we want to go and use a spa link to get to our product detail page. So let's go and change out home content to point at that product. So I'm going to go and link in here to, oh, that actually looks pretty good. And just wrap the product name in that. And I'm also going to do the same thing for the image. So if I log in and then I click on Solid Rainbow, I'm still logged in. Everything is great. So I have a coherent spa nav across the app. So that's awesome. And yes, that seemed fast, right? But at the same time, we were pretty much set up from the get-go to allow for that. So now let's answer one of the biggest questions that I get when it comes to module federation and micro-FEs, which is how to test this stuff. And we'll start off by looking at unit testing. So I'm going to close out all these files. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a test to the home page that will require the cart information. So we'll need to mock the cart. So I'm going to first go to home, and then I'm going to stop the server, and I'm going to add the testing library for React hooks, because we're going to basically create a hook that depends on the cart count. And then I'm going to set up the jest environment by creating a new file called jest.config.js. And I'm going to say that our environment is the JS DOM. So now we're going to go and create our use cart count. So I'll create a new file, and we'll call that use cart count. And I'm going to bring in use state and use effect from React. I'm going to bring in the cart, as you would. And then I'm going to export use cart count, and that's going to set up some state that has the initial cart items length in it. And then I'm going to return that count. And in the meantime, I'm going to also do a use effect with no dependency array. So it's only going to run on startup. And then I'm going to subscribe to the cart and get that cart items. And then set the count to the length of those cart items. So that's a pretty simple one. All I want is the number of items in the cart. Pretty simple. So how am I going to test this? So I'm going to go and create a new file called useCartCount.spec.js. And I'm going to bring in the testing library with React hooks. And it's going to allow us to render a hook and then call functions on it if we want to. But we're going to use this to basically trigger that subscribe. And then we're going to bring in our hook. And then we're going to create our first test. So we're going to describe use cart count. And we're going to say that it should return a cart count. And we're going to just get the result from use cart count. And we're going to expect that to be 0 since there's no cart currently. And we're going to mock the cart count. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's just do just mock and then give it cart, which is what we're looking for over in use cart count. So is that going to work? Let's give that a try. So let's do yarn jest. And we see that it can't find that module cart. So the way that we can trick it into believing that there's that module is to create a new manual mock for the cart. So we'll create a folder called mocks. Inside that, a folder called cart. And then within that, a new file called cart.js, where we will export a default of essentially just an empty object. And let's give it a try. And there you go, ran and passed. So we're going to add another test where we essentially bump the cart count. So we'll add that in. So use that cart count hook, and that's going to basically send us a callback in that use effect. And then we're going to call that back and say that we have a new set of cart items. So we need to store that callback somewhere. So I'm going to put that up here. And then I'm going to replace this subscribe with a function that takes a callback and then sets that callback value. So let's try this, see if it works. All right, 2 passes. Okay, cool. So that's unit testing. So you can mock out these remote modules. That's not a problem. So now let's talk about E2E testing. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to use Cypress. So the first thing I need to do is add Cypress. And then I'm going to open Cypress by doing yarn run Cypress open. And so what it's done is it's gone over here and it's created a Cypress directory. And in there's a bunch of tests. We're going to do all the integration tests and all that sort of stuff. We don't need any of that, so we're just going to get rid of that. So I'm going to create a new file in here, and we're going to call it E2E spec.js. And I'm going to describe my first E2E test. So now we have to record a test. So I'm going to go and create yet another terminal where I'm going to run home. So I'm going to jump back into home and yarn start it. And now I'm going to bring up the Cypress recorder, which is an extension on Chrome. And I'm going to do start recording. Then I'm going to log in. Then I'm going to show the cart. I'm going to clear the cart. I'm going to go and add an item to the cart. And then I'm going to go to the cart page. Now let's go take a look at what our test has. All right, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to stop recording, and I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to say it should add an item to the cart. All right, so let's go over and look at our Cypress. And I'm going to run our E2E spec. That's going to bring up Chrome. All right, and it didn't contain that localhost. I'm not sure why that happened, so I'm going to go over and get rid of this. I don't think that's the case anyway. So let's stop and then restart it. All right, looking pretty good. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to test to make sure that we get this 599 value at the very end. So we're going to need an ID on that. So let's go back over to our cart page and make sure that we have an ID on that grand total. So we'll go down to cart content and we'll scroll down here and we'll make sure that, oh, we need an ID on this. Call that grand underscore total. Excellent. Okay, let's go take a look at this. And we should be able to say cy.get, get the grand total. And I'm going to say that should, contain, and what was the number we wanted again? 599. So let's take a look and do 599 here and see if we get a passing test. Awesome. Light is green, and that's an end-to-end test over multiple independently deployed applications. That is just super cool. All right, so let's talk about what to look for next when it comes to learning module federation and micro-FEs. And one area in particular I think you should have a look at is single SPA. So single SPA fits on top of module federation, and it gives you a way of making your components cross-platform. So as I did with place add to cart, that's a pretty simple, hacky way to do it. Single SPA does it the right way. It actually goes and wraps all of the different platforms. It wraps their components in kind of a uniform parcel, and then you can deploy those using either System.js or using module federation, which I think is very easy. And then you can consume those in any other application. So you could parcel up a Vue component and then reuse it in a React component. It makes it super simple. Another thing I think you should keep an eye on is Bit. This is a company that has been doing micro-FE/shared component work for a long time, and they've been looking at module federation, so there might be some interesting synergies going on there. So definitely keep an eye out for micro-FEs when it comes to Bit. And then I often get asked, like, have you actually seen this in the wild yet? And a friend of mine was working over at Lowe's, and they've actually used the module federation and micro-FEs to create this really cool paint finder. So they've got an app, and they embedded this paint finder in it, and now these two things are independently deployable, which is really, really cool. So it is out there in the wild, and that's great. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this look into micro-FEs and you got a lot out of it. Be sure to put any questions you have in the comment section down below. And of course, hit that like button if you like the video. All right, enjoy your future in micro-FEs.